This video is brought to you by Kadabi, makers of premium accessories for your phones and tablets. Find Kadabi at kadabi.com. It is Chad here from GadgetGuruHD.com, and in this video I'll be giving my full review and also opinions on the Nexus 5. I've been using this phone for about 2.5 weeks now, and have a good idea of what I like about the device, and also what could be improved on it. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, one of the most notable differences between the Nexus 5 and just about every other top-of-the-line smartphone right now is the operating system and software. That's because there are very few devices running 4.4 KitKat, which is the latest version of Android and what the Nexus 5 currently runs on. What's fantastic about Nexus branded phones is that they will always be the first to be updated to the newest Android versions, while other devices like the Galaxy Note 3 will receive the update several weeks or months later. And in the long-term scheme of things, those devices won't actually receive the latest updates at all, while the Nexus devices in theory will and should be supported. In addition, Nexus users receive what is known as stock Android, which is essentially how Google envisions Android to be. 4.4 KitKat is a major design overhaul and is generally cleaner with new icons and translucent menu bars that replace the older, stale black color design. I've really come to enjoy the new design of KitKat. It makes any device not running 4.4 look old and clunky. The new change is a nice refresher and something that I'm really happy with. Now, some new notable features in 4.4 KitKat are the swipe to the left to access Google Now, and at first I thought the idea was a bit dumb, but as time has gone on, I'm really starting to take advantage of voice commands and just in general I'm using Google Now a lot more. Now, speaking of voice commands, you can actually also say "Okay Google" and Google Now will automatically start up. This is very similar to the feature on the Moto X, but the Nexus 5 actually does have to be unlocked, which is a bit annoying, and we may actually see support for this in newer versions of Android. One of the main things that I was worried about with the Nexus 5 was actually the size of it, because when you hear a 4.95 inch screen, you actually think it's going to be pretty large, but that really isn't the case. Google really nailed the dimensions of the phone, and if you're looking for actual numbers, here it is. It's actually 137mm tall and 69mm wide. That being said, here is a quick comparison between the Galaxy Note 3 and also the Nexus 5 in size. The Nexus 5 is significantly smaller, but for myself the size is really perfect. And one of the things that I'm often asked about the Nexus 5 is whether or not it can be held and used comfortably in one hand. And my answer is just about always a definite yes. I don't have to strain myself when navigating through the OS or when going through emails, and just overall operating the Nexus 5 with one hand is actually a real breeze. Having a 5-inch plus phone seems to be the new thing, but I would rather have a slightly smaller device that can be used whenever I want, and it still has the functionality of a so-called phablet. As far as the materials used with this phone, it's actually made of a soft to the touch matte type material that's actually quite similar to the Nexus 7 2013. It really is a major step up from the easily shatterable glass on the Nexus 4 and the cheap plastic back of the Galaxy Nexus. However, it will gather some smudges if you have oily or greasy hands, but that's easily curable with some water or just a nice material that will clean it off. In terms of the thickness of the Nexus 5, it's 8.6mm, which isn't exactly super thin, and it's a bit thicker than most of the devices being released now, but for myself it isn't that big of a deal because it does have a 2300 mAh battery, which isn't huge, but I'd rather have a larger battery than a thinner device. Like I mentioned earlier, the Nexus 5 has a 4.95 inch display. This is 1080p resolution, and if you're wondering for the specifics, it's an IPS display with 455 pixels per inch. If you don't understand the difference between IPS, AMOLED, all these different types of screens, the IPS displays generally give a better viewing angle and give a much more accurate color representation than AMOLED displays, which are mostly used on Samsung devices. Now, I'm a huge fan of the IPS display on the Nexus 5 because it's honestly one of the most accurate displays I've seen. Now, some people have said that the Nexus 5 display seems a bit washed out, but I have to disagree. That's usually just in comparison to AMOLED displays, which are just so saturated. In terms of availability of the Nexus 5, it can be purchased in 16 and 32GB variants, with black and white available. I'll have a link down below in the description where you guys can pick this device up. Now, unfortunately, there isn't expandable storage or a removable battery, so that is a bummer if either of those things are important to you. Speaking of the battery on the Nexus 5, like I mentioned earlier, it does feature a smaller 2300 mAh battery that is capable of making it through the day. Now in my own scenario, I had to sacrifice some things like turning off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and just dimming down the phone a little bit to make it through the day. But if you do decide to purchase the Nexus 5, then you guys can go ahead and check out my video explaining how to improve the battery life. Now because the Nexus 5 only costs $350, I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful it really is. It features the latest Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 quad-core processor, and it performs extremely well. It delivers a super smooth operation of the operating system, and it really is capable of multitasking plenty of apps and handling the most graphic-intensive games. Now this crazy fast processor paired with stock Android along with the 2 GB of RAM makes the Nexus 5 one of the quickest phones I've ever used. Now one of the places that we really see Google and LG cut corners on the Nexus 5 is with the camera. Quite honestly, the camera on the Nexus 5 just really underperforms. I'm not sure if it's the hardware of the camera that isn't great, because it does use an 8 megapixel camera, which on paper is actually pretty good, but I've found that there are a lot of software issues with it, like focusing. I've had some issues. With the Nexus 5, it'll show that it's in focus, but then I'll take a picture and it's just super out of focus. So from what I've heard, Google is supposed to be rolling out a software update that should hopefully improve the camera quality, but as of right now with this review, the camera on the Nexus 5 is pretty bad. Now the final thing we're going to do in this review is just take a complete tour around the Nexus 5, because most of the time people aren't really familiar with the Nexus 5 and they just want to figure out how everything works. Now on the very top of the phone we'll find our 3.5mm headphone jack, which of course is used for listening to audio and music. Over on the right side of the handset we'll find our ceramic power button and also the SIM card slot. I might have gotten a faulty unit, but my volume rockers are very flimsy and cheap feeling. But that being said, they are supposedly made out of ceramic. On the left side of the Nexus 5 we can see our volume rockers, which like I said are made out of ceramic. And down on the bottom of the phone we have ourselves the micro USB charging ports for charging and syncing. And lastly our dual stereo speakers, which are each outside the micro USB port. And in my opinion, the speakers are a pretty huge disappointment because they sound a bit muffled and they don't get very loud. This is definitely one of the places, along with the camera, where LG cut corners to get the phone down to the $350 price tag. Overall, the Nexus 5 is probably one of the best phones out there, along with the LG G2 and the Galaxy Note 3. Then again, there are some downsides like the camera and also the speaker quality, but those issues are very easy to overlook due to the extremely low price tag. So that right there was our review of the Google Nexus 5. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. I am Chad from GadgetGuruHD.com, and I'll see all of you in the next video.